This LinkedIn Live event is about the research that I've done into systems thinking, how it can be applied into the field of cybersecurity. One of the things that I'll be doing at the end of this event is providing you access to a free ebook that I have produced around some of these core principles, but also a little bit more in depth about how these can be used in cybersecurity. So let's move on to the presentation. So I'm going to go through a couple of checks just to make sure you're in the right place, so you know what this event is about, what you're going to learn and take away from it. Some tips and tricks I'll be providing throughout this event that you'll be able to apply straight away. So there's some extra gifts there for you if you like. Talk a little bit about my background, then we'll get right into the presentation, and we will then open it up for Q&A at the end, and then I'll provide you the access to the link to the free ebook. Okay, so you know you're in the right place. This is the right event for you. If you're a security practitioner looking to improve your thinking skills, if you want to better solve complex security challenges, thinking more effectively, if you want to improve your stakeholder communication skills, if you're seeking ways to differentiate yourself professionally, this is going to be a great event to take some of those tips away and apply those. And if you believe in continuous learning and professional development. Okay, by the end of this event, you're going to understand why how you think is more important than what you think. I'm going to go over some of the research that I've done and some of the research that others have done about thinking, teach you the 4 universal patterns of thinking, and give you some tips to apply immediately. And then we'll give you the access to my free ebook, and I'll also talk about a course that I've got coming out soon. I can see some feedback coming in. Harshit, thank you for saying hi. Sound and video works too. That's thumbs up, and from Michael as well. So thank you very much for providing that input. A little bit of background about myself. Out of school, spent 8 years in the Australian Navy, traveling around Southeast Asia, the South Pacific. 5 years as a diving instructor, working in Cairns, taught about 850 people how to scuba dive. Great lifestyle, not so great on the money. So then I decided to flip it, move into technology and cybersecurity. Better money, no lifestyle, so to speak, or a different lifestyle, I should probably say. So over 20 years working in technology roles, CISO roles in banks, financial institutions here in Australia, and also worked around the globe, the Middle East, New Zealand, and London as well. Got a deep passion for thinking, how people think, why they think the way they do, trying to uncover that, learn more about it. Last year, I published some research on systems thinking in cybersecurity, talk a little bit about that. And then recently have expanded and founded a company called Cybercognition. And our purpose here at Cybercognition is to change the way that people and organizations think about cybersecurity. I think there's some fundamental advances that we can make that can help both individuals and organizations deal with the challenges that we're facing on a daily basis. So normally in these presentations, I would do a quick survey. You can answer in the chat if you feel comfortable. So what I normally ask people is put your hands up if you did some thinking today. You'll get most people will put their hands up. Second question then is, did you think about how you were thinking? Normally a number of hands will go down. And then the third question is, based on what you thought about how you were thinking, did you change what you thought? More hands go down, sometimes you're left with none, which is very interesting. And that's the basis for what a lot of this information is that you're going to receive through this event, is changing the way you think to get better outcomes and take better actions. So one of the most powerful things, this is the first tip that I give you, is that taking the time to reflect on your thinking, to understand why you're thinking in a certain way, what the outcomes of that are, do you need to think differently, is very powerful. So whether it's sitting down over a coffee, getting out in nature, journaling, taking the time to think about how you're thinking is one of the most powerful tools that you can implement. Stephen Fleming, well-known scientist, said this, that insights into our own thoughts, or metacognition, which is simply thinking about thinking, is the key to high achievement in all domains, which I think says a lot about how powerful this simple practice is. So let's get into the meat of it. A lot of you will be familiar with this. What we're experiencing at the moment is an explosion of digital and information across the world. If we look back over history, there's been 4 eras, if you like, evolutions that we've gone through. In the Industrial Revolution, the first one, it was about mechanical production, okay, driven by water, steam power to automate processes for efficiency. Then we had the second industrial revolution, driven by the use of electricity, again, further automation, mass production, the division of labor, getting people just to focus on one small task, doing that well. The third revolution then was when we started to get the explosion of electronics and IT to further automate production. And then we've got where we are today, which is this ubiquitous nature of devices, information, and technology. Everything as a service, this massive increase in the amount of data that we have access to, continually growing on a daily basis. With that evolution through those different revolutions, so to speak, we've had an increasing degree of complexity. More devices, more applications, more systems that we need to manage, and then a higher interconnectedness and interrelationship between all of those, which just makes the job of cybersecurity defenders much harder. And I'm sure all of you would agree with that. What it's also done then is created a perfect storm for the cyber criminals. So we can see here that the estimated costs of cybercrime, it's very hard to get a very accurate figure on it. But certainly what we're seeing in the environment today is this ever increasing cost of cybercrime for both companies and nations across the globe. No sign of that reducing. And the good thing to note here is that this is in trillions of dollars. So the bad guys are taking advantage of that industrial revolution, the 4th industrial revolution, the ubiquity of devices and information, and the challenges that we face in protecting that. Then if we look at cybersecurity spending, again, trending up across the globe. This is in billions of dollars, again, projected out to 2028, 273 billion across both cybersecurity solutions and services. So we've got this trend that doesn't seem to be abating, and you would hope at some point that as spending increases, that the costs of cybercrime that we're challenged with today would start to decrease, but it doesn't seem like that's going to be the case. So for me, there's something fundamentally wrong in how we're approaching it. So we can either continue to throw money at it, see if it gets any better. Those 2 numbers would probably suggest that it's not going to. So we're basically relying on hope, which is not really a strategy. So what we need is a fundamental change in the way that we think. I think this is a really great comment from Tony Sager, who's the evangelist, if you like, for the Centre for Internet Security. Tony worked previously for the National Security Agency in the US and has now, for the large amount of time since, been working with CIS to promote their benchmarks and their standards. When he was asked about why does he think that attacks keep happening and that they're successful, he attributes those failures primarily to the complexity of modern systems, the noisy, confusing environment of technology, marketplace claims, oversight, regulation, and that defenders are just overwhelmed. And I'm sure a lot of you would feel that pain. So just this deluge of information that we're having to deal with on a daily basis is creating what he calls the fog of more, which is a play on words for Clausewitz's comment about, or fog of more, sorry, which is Clausewitz's term for the fog of war and the confusion that happens during that. I think another really great quote comes from John Lambert, who is the VP for threat intelligence at Microsoft. And this is something that he said, I think, back in 2015. He called it this reality bias, which is the attacker's advantage lies in what you think you have, so your beliefs, and what you manage, which is the actual reality of your environment. And he suggested that instead we must manage from reality, and that's the prepared defender's mindset. So reality bias is really where you think you know what is happening in the environment, but you're actually being influenced by your mental models. And we'll talk about those, which are part of your beliefs. We'll talk about those soon. So I mentioned I did some research last year through an organisation called Cabrera Research Labs. What I wanted to do as part of this research was understand how systems thinking is applied in cybersecurity. And they use a term called the condition of knowledge, which is about understanding both from a research perspective at an academic level and in the public sphere, how is systems thinking being applied in cybersecurity? So you could go and do the same thing. It took me about 6 to 8 months researching hundreds of papers, understanding how they're proposing cybersecurity should use systems thinking. I'll give you a link to my paper later on if you're interested. Save you a lot of work. Basically, the outcome of what I found as part of that research was that most of the applications of systems thinking in cybersecurity are either biased in how they propose it to be used, or it's used in very specialized areas. So it's not something that's universally applicable. They have very distinct niche use cases where it's applied, which is great for those use cases, not so good for the general practitioner's use. The term systems thinking is very vague. So in some research, they simply say cybersecurity practitioners should think holistically, should think systemically, which is not very useful. It's like saying to a medical student, when you're operating, you should think medically. Okay, it's not very useful, not very specific. It doesn't give you any way to apply it. And a lot of the research was unscientific, so not backed up by empirical evidence. So when we start to put those together, we can see that we've got a situation where we're moving through this industrial revolution through the first, second, third, fourth waves. There's a number of types of methods and theories in systems thinking, waves as they're defined here, that have emerged and evolved over a period of time. Most of the research from what I did shows that we're stuck using the first and second wave approaches for systems thinking, and that hasn't advanced. So I think there's a real opportunity that I'll talk about of how we can apply more modern approaches, more universally applicable approaches of systems thinking within cybersecurity to help people think better about the challenges they're facing on a daily basis. There's a great opportunity to establish broad practical applications in the cybersecurity domain, and I think educate the next wave of practitioners in the foundations of thinking more broadly. And that's one of the areas where I'm focusing on, which is the catalyst for this LinkedIn event, developing the ebook that I'm going to share. A lot of my posts are around systems thinking, in particular this theory that I'll explain, and also a course that I'm looking at developing and releasing in the next couple of months as well. So what is thinking? So this is what's called the systems thinking loop. Today, when we're walking around in the world, at work, professionally, personally, each of us have mental models, which are really an accumulation of knowledge and experience we have over a number of years. They're an accumulation of the beliefs that we hold about why things work, why they don't work, the ideas that we have. They're a structure for how we take information in and make decisions in the world. Ideally, what we should be doing is testing those models against reality in the systems that we're interested in, getting feedback and adjusting and adapting our mental models to make sure that they're maintaining alignment with the reality that we're seeing. But what we often find is that we have these mixed mental models which are fixed. We don't change our thinking. It doesn't align to reality. Things don't work out the way we expect them to, and we become extremely frustrated because we're not aware that there are these mental models that are a veil, if you like, between what we actually see and experience in the world today. So our mental models are both conscious and unconscious. They ultimately drive our beliefs, assumptions, predictions, decisions, and the behavior that we have in any situation that we face. So understanding our mental models, that we even have them, becomes critically important if we're to change the way that we think and adapt to this complex environment and deal with the fog of war that Tony Sager talked about and that John Lambert mentioned around understanding what we think is reality and what actually is. What I'll do now is I'm just going to show you a quick video, which I really like. I think it illustrates the power of mental models and what can happen when we don't understand that we have these mental models. So I think that's a really good illustration of something that we see happen on a daily basis, especially in cybersecurity. We see we're getting information about a situation. We may be consciously or unconsciously choosing to ignore it until something catastrophic happens, and then we go, "Holy crap! Maybe I should have taken more notice of what that person or that organisation was telling me about the environment that I'm in." Never tire of seeing that video. I think it's great. So basically, thinking is the way that we organise information to make meaning. So how do we take that information in, make meaning about the environment that we're working in, and then make decisions going forward? So I mentioned Cabrera Research Labs. About 30 years ago, Derek Cabrera, who's a professor at Cornell University and started up the Cabrera Research Lab, developed a theory called DSRP. DSRP is the underlying principles or patterns of how we organize information as people and make sense of the world that we're in. So within DSRP, there are 4 patterns. He loves acronyms, didn't come up with a fancy name. So D stands for distinctions, and each pattern has an element, oh, sorry, 2 elements. So distinctions, when we make distinctions, we have an identity and we have an other. We're very good at identifying things, but we're not so good at naming or identifying what the other is, what something is and what it isn't. The second pattern is systems. Systems are made up of parts and wholes, and those wholes are also parts of other wholes. So there's different scales and different levels within nature and the systems that we build. Again, generally, we're very good at diving in, looking at the parts. We're not so good at zooming out and looking at the wholes and how those parts are related, which feeds into the third one, relationships. Many things are interrelated and interconnected. Those relationships form an action and a reaction. Again, we're very good at taking action, not so good about understanding the reactions. And the fourth pattern is perspectives. So every perspective has a view, the thing that you're looking at, and a point, which is from where it's being viewed. Perspectives don't necessarily have to have eyes, they don't have to be people or organisms, they could be conceptual perspectives as well. We'll go into that a little bit in a minute. So we distinguish between one thing and another thing. We sort things into parts and wholes. We see relationships between among things, how they act upon and react to each other. And we take perspectives. From the point of one thing, we view another thing. Now, you don't get to choose whether you apply these patterns in your thinking. It's like gravity. You don't get to choose whether gravity applies to you. You are continually, without you even knowing it, distinguishing things, sorting them into parts and wholes, identifying relationships, and taking perspectives. How well you do it is another question. Now, if you were to go and Google different types of thinking, you'll see there's probably more than 38, but 38 at least different types of thinking, all of them focusing on a different aspect of DSRP in terms of how they suggest that you should use those. Given that DSRP is a universal pattern that underlies all of those, I went through a process of, investigating each of these different types of thinking, learning how to practice them, learning how to apply them. I didn't get through, maybe a tenth of them, and that was within, the last 18, 20 years. Whether I would have got through and understood all of them is a different question. For me, the shortcut is to understand DSRP, which underlies all of them, and you get all those other ones for free, so it can save you a lot of time. So how does this apply in cybersecurity? So if we take those 2 comments by John Lambert and Tony Sager and apply them to the model here, we've got defenders, which are looking at the real world environments that we're dealing with, our own systems, our own organizations. We've got attackers that are looking at them as well. You could argue that the attackers are more successful than the defenders at the moment, especially given those earlier numbers around the amount of money, the cost that it's incurring on us and the spending that we're doing. We are both using the systems thinking loop. So we're taking our mental models, applying them to the real world, making decisions, taking actions, getting feedback from the real world, taking that information, using DSRP to organize it, and that loop continues on and on. So attackers, defenders, we're both using the same model. Challenges we have is that we're focusing on too much about the information, not about the structure of it, which creates that fog of war. The attackers are better at doing that, on focusing on reality, taking decisions based on what they actually see, not on what they think they see, which I think gives them the competitive advantage at the moment. So if we were to take the research that's been done, again, over 300 papers written about DSRP theory, great depth of empirical evidence about how people apply it and how well they apply it, we can see this one piece of research, sample size of, it was actually over 34,000 people. If you distill that down to a team where there's only 10 members in your team, just to make it simple, if they were to be given a problem to think through, a decision to make, a challenge to solve, what the research shows is that 5 out of those 10 people get stuck and don't do anything. The other 5 start identifying things, so focusing on that element of identify. No one considers the other when they're making those distinctions. When it comes to systems, 2.5 people out of that team of 10 break the problem down into parts. They're very good at zooming in, looking at the detail. None of them zoom out and look at what the actual bigger picture is. Then when you look at relationships, 1.5 of them would consider how the elements of that problem are related. None of them identify the action or the reaction as part of those relationships. And then finally, which is probably the most troubling, is that less than 1 of them identify anything more than their own perspective in that problem or challenge that they're thinking about. And none of them identify that their point of view is biased. So you see this all the time, where people are promoting an idea, trying to push a solution. They're seeing it just from their perspective. They get very frustrated, creates a lot of tension when they don't take the time to understand other people's perspectives. Why doesn't the board think more about cybersecurity? Why don't I report to the CEO? Why don't we have more money? No one tries to take the perspective of those other people in that system and understand exactly what is driving their behaviors and what their perspective is on it. So if there's nothing else that you take out of this, it's trying to understand what other people's perspectives are can really open up a lot of opportunities for you in your career and your daily work. So what the research also showed is that there's some very basic fundamental moves that you can use on a daily basis to help counteract those biases that was mentioned in the research in that previous slide. Very simple questions you can ask yourself, other people, to help focus on understanding each of those 4 patterns and what you may be missing. So for distinctions, distinguishing between one thing and another, there's a move they've developed, and again, very simple, very basic, not too technical, everybody can do it in every situation, is the is not move. So when you're defining something, putting a boundary around it, identifying it, most of us identify what it is. Very few take the time to understand what it is not. So when people talk about this is a risk, they have an idea on what it is. If you actually get in a room and talk through it about what it is not and what they don't think it is, then you start to get a better idea as to where those boundaries are and understand why people may be using the same term to mean different things, or they could be using different terms to mean the same things. So a very simple trick or tip that you can use to articulate exactly what something is and what it isn't, so that you get closer to understanding what other people are talking about. An example of this in World War II, work was done on bombers, why they were returning full of bullet holes and how could they better protect them. So the Air Force officers had an idea about where they should put the armor on these planes. So they went to a gentleman called Walt to have him work out, he was a mathematician and a systems thinker, to work out where they could place the armor on these planes to prevent them from being shot. So he was a systems thinker, mathematician. Instead of looking at where they'd identified where the bullet holes were and putting the armor there, what he did was flip the model and said, what about the planes that aren't returning? maybe that's where we should be putting the armor, which is around the engines. So by doing a very simple move and identifying the other, he was able to make decisions and recommendations that the experts hadn't even considered. So we can do a similar thing here with cybersecurity. We can look at, for example, what a web application is. So it could be business critical. It could be holding sensitive data. It's internet facing and outsourced to a third party. We could make decisions around how secure that is, what we're doing from terms of controls, and how secure it is. But if we then looked at what it is not, we might identify that it's not monitored 24/7, it's not on a support contract, it's not up to date on patches, and it's not behind a web application firewall. So that changes the decisions that we make and the actions that we take by not just focusing on what something is, we're also looking at what it is not. Second example for systems. So a very simple question again, what do I see when I zoom into the parts, but also when I zoom out, what do I see that this part is of in a larger whole? Generally, we have two types of people, people who split things into parts. They love to break things down. That's generally where technical people, cybersecurity people focus. Very few people are lumpers who put the things together and look at the bigger picture. What we actually need is more splumpers. So people who can do both splitting and lumping. Again, let's say we were doing an initiative to implement zero trust in our environment. Typically what would happen in the security team or the technology team, whoever's responsible for implementing it, is we start breaking it down into its parts. And if you use the 5 domains approach for zero trust, you would be looking at the identity, looking at devices, applications, network, and data. Very few people will then zoom out and look at maybe this initiative is part of a larger compliance remediation plan within our organization. What else is going on as part of that plan? Is there going to be resource constraints? Are we going to conflict with what else is happening in the organization at the same time? So rather than focusing myopically on what is part of a zero trust implementation, looking at the parts, it's zooming out, understanding where we may have challenges and be able to make better decisions as part of that initiative. Relationships, we have actions and reactions. Again, it's about identifying the parts of the system. Then how are those parts interrelated? What does an action in one part do in terms of getting a reaction in another part of that system? So again, looking at zero trust, all of those 5 domains aren't implemented in isolation. They are all interrelated and all interconnected. So understanding when we're focusing on implementing device control policies, conditional policies, for example, how does that affect the applications that people are using? How does it affect their access to data? When we're making changes to the network as part of zero trust, how does it affect devices, applications, data identity, all of those parts? So being able to understand how the parts of any initiative are interrelated, how actions in one area can result in reactions that were unanticipated in other areas of the environment. Which leads on to the other point that we often overlook is that we think that there is a root cause, one single thing for why something happened. But because often these relationships that we have in our environments and our systems are hidden, it's actually a web of causalities that contribute from those multiple parts that result in incidents or outages or reactions that were unanticipated and unplanned for. So having that more systemic view and understanding the interrelationship between parts becomes very important in understanding what contributes to the outcomes that we have in our environments today based on the actions that we take. One of the bugbears that I have with cybersecurity is that people talk about a root cause and they think that by doing one thing, another thing occurs, and we tend to blame the user is a great one. If we just got rid of users, we wouldn't have to worry about security. Users are stupid. They click on a phishing link. You see senior leaders in organizations publicly saying that they would fire employees if they continue to click on phishing links, which is just an abhorrent way to deal with any system because they're so focused on a root cause, that one person being the reason why the phishing link was clicked on. They don't look at the conditions that contributed to that person making that decision at the time, the web of causality, which sometimes is those leaders' decisions about how people work and the conditions that they put them in can sometimes contribute to why they're under pressure, don't think, and click on a phishing link. So again, with relationships, it's not only about identifying and zooming into those relationships and identifying which parts are connected, but it's about distinguishing those relationships and working out the parts that are required to make that relationship work. One of the challenges we face in security is that people often have silos within organizations that create a lot of tension. Those silos can be broken down by doing what's called the R-zoom move. So this is simply about thinking about the relationships between different parts of organizations and then making some distinction about that relationship. It could be putting a person in place that's responsible for building that relationship and breaking down those silos. Silos are necessary to a certain extent in an organization because it defines a boundary of work or a class of people or a process. But it's when you have a lack of understanding about how you make those relationships work between the different organizations and teams that you start to get that tension and that siloification. So in our zero trust environment here that we've been talking about, maybe what we do is we have a person who's responsible for building that relationship between the two parts, the security team and the end users. They increase end user awareness so that the actions and the reactions that you have between and as part of that initiative are better understood. They could be responsible for translating feedback into requirements. So the actions that the security team takes, the end users are made aware of it. You understand what their reactions might be. You feed that back to the security team. They can adjust and adapt if they need to. And that person could be responsible for monitoring that deployment and ensuring that the communication between those different parts aren't impeded by the silo that would typically be there. And perspectives, as we said, people are looking at a thing, a view from a certain point. Simple question, from what or whose point of view must I look at these things? And if we look at our Zero Trust initiative again, we see that there's a number of different perspectives that we might take. There's a financial perspective to anything that we do. What's the return on security investment? Cost benefit analysis, budget allocations, ongoing costs. Perspective from end users. What's their needs, preferences, training and support? What's the operational perspective from this from this initiative? How are we looking at the technical resources we need, the tooling, the reporting, the monitoring? And finally, there's always the perspective of the attackers. If we're putting in something like zero trust, attackers would consider, does that raise the cost to attack that environment? Does it decrease our chance of success? Will they need additional resources to be able to breach that environment? And are they potentially going to have an extended dwell time because of the controls that you've put in place? So understanding the attacker's perspective from everything that we do becomes critical as well. But as the research showed previously, most people only look at it from their own perspective and not taking the time to look at it from others. So often we see this, a good recommendation before you talk or type or send an email, understand that there are multiple truths depending on what your perspective is with any situation or challenge that you're looking at. And taking the time to appreciate what someone else's perspective is can save you from getting in a lot of hot water. Certainly early on in my career, sent a lot of emails without understanding what other people's perspective were, made a lot of comments, got a lot of people offside. You quickly learn that maybe your version of the truth is not actually the whole truth. So when you change your perspective, what else changes? The distinctions that you make, the relationships that are relevant, the way the parts are grouped together. In fact, all things change when you change your perspective. And that's why it's such a powerful move to make in any situation. So what I've done is outlined just some of the basic cognitive moves, if you like, that you can apply in any situation that help you understand more deeply about what you're seeing, the questions that you can ask. These aren't one-time things though. And there's many more of these moves. You can combine them in multiple ways to help you understand any situation, challenge, or problem. It's something that you've got to practice on a daily basis. You've got to build that repetition into the way that you're thinking before they become second nature. It's like physical moves. If you said, I'm just going to go to the gym, I'm going to bench press 200 kilos once every quarter, you're probably not going to get fit. You're more likely to get injured. Not a great approach. The same with thinking. Once you start applying these rules, understanding the patterns, asking these questions, they become part of your everyday thinking, your everyday interactions, and you start to uncover and understand a lot more about the systems that you're working in. So it sounds simple, but it's not easy to do. It requires consistent practice. And it's all great to talk about these things theoretically, but what's the actual benefits that you get from doing them? So again, large amount of work's been done in the research to understand what are the actual benefits you get from understanding DSRP and applying the cognitive moves. So what the research has shown is that your increase in systems thinking and your problem solving ability on average can increase by up to 380%. Now, if you were an athlete and I came into you and said, hey, you do the 100-meter sprint, I'm going to teach you this one move. It's going to give you a 5.51x increase in your ability to run the 100 meters. I'm pretty sure that that person would be out on the track expecting you to teach them how to do that. So the same with thinking. If you can get these types of increases in how you think about and solve problems, why wouldn't you start adopting some of these cognitive moves and understanding how DSRP informs the way that you think? Pretty much seems like a no-brainer, and part of the reason why I'm pretty passionate about why this should be something that's embedded into cybersecurity education for all practitioners at all levels. So just as we start to wrap up here, things to keep in mind: you are already and always using DSRP. You just don't understand how you're using it and the ways that it could be biasing how you're thinking. Reality is already and always using DSRP, so it exists in nature as it does in your mind. The attackers are already and always using DSRP, which, to John Lambert's point, is probably why they've got a competitive advantage, because they think differently to the way defenders do. And so better thinking is really about purposely using these DSRP moves to organize the information that you're dealing with on a daily basis to adapt to reality. So, as we conclude, I hope that's been informative for you and you've got some benefit from it. If anyone's got any questions, you can pop them into the chat and we'll see if there's anything that comes out in the next couple of minutes. While we're waiting for any questions or queries, I will just populate that QR code. So if you click on that, it'll take you to the link. If you simply provide name and email address, you'll get an email with that ebook to download. Like I said, it talks a little bit about DSRP that I've covered here, but also about some other fundamental concepts that can improve your thinking, understand why you're getting the responses and the reactions that you do in your daily life. And also, it will put you on the wait list for the Systems Thinking for Cybersecurity course, which will be released in the coming months. That'll be more of a formal course that will take you through the patterns that we talked about, the elements, a little bit more deeply about the research. It will also take time and we'll apply these patterns and concepts in cybersecurity initiatives. What you find is that they're things you can take away, practically use immediately in your work and get benefit. And then we go through how do you make it become part of the way that you think continually. So we've got a couple of responses there. So yes, it is a lot to take in. it's a fundamental change in the way that you think. The ebook is a great place for further reading. Follow me on LinkedIn. I also have, which will be in the ebook, a link to a newsletter I publish every 2 weeks, so you can get these tips and tricks direct to your inbox. What else have we got? Carl thought it was great content. Thank you, Carl. I'll pop the QR code up there for anyone else. We've got a few of you scanning it, which is great. And any feedback if you've got, you can direct message me on in the ebook. There'll be contact details for my email as well. Love getting feedback. If there's something you understood, didn't understand, let me know. If you thought the ebook could be improved, it is free. I'm more than willing to take that feedback, which I should be, given what we've been talking about, and adapting it to be easier to understand. I think this LinkedIn event will be published on my profile page as well, so you can get access to that, come back and have a look through it on my LinkedIn profile and rewatch it, I believe. But like I said, this is the first time, so we'll see. Yeah, let me just check the chat. What else have we got? Someone said, great opportunity to coach people. Yes, and that's the part of the course, to be able to take people through in a group environment, I think is important as well. I do have a free email-based course where you can learn a lot of this content, but the overwhelming feedback from people who did the email course was, hey, can we do it in a group? And can we do it live, which is one of the reasons that's driving the online course that I'll be releasing in a couple of months. And yeah, again, my experience has been that once people start to understand these concepts and apply them, it's something that they, like riding a bike, you start using it, you realize the benefits, and it becomes second nature. Some good feedback from Peter. Glad you enjoyed it. So yeah, there is some great strategies. They are pretty much fundamental, like I said, to thinking, and you can leverage them for a lot of benefit. Who have we got? A LinkedIn user said, did you find many cyber-related case studies similar to the bomber example? Most of the cyber-related case studies for systems thinking were based on applying principles for security incidents. So systems dynamics is often used as a model. Again, it's a very niche model with a specific way of applying it. There is some empirical evidence that supports systems dynamics as a way of typically measuring the actions, reactions, the feedback loops within any system. There's another paper I'll be releasing in the next couple of weeks, hopefully, that focuses more specifically on how these DSRP theories can be applied in cybersecurity scenarios. So again, if you follow me on LinkedIn or reach out when that paper's released in this Journal of Systems Thinking, you can access that. It'll hopefully make it a little bit more explicit for you. One thing to note too with the ebook, that if you just want to download the ebook and you're not interested in the course, you can still make that decision as well. So it's not like you're locked into getting spam emails from me for the rest of your life. I'm very conscious about making sure that people only get the content that they want and that they need. All right, I think with that, there's no more messages that have come through. So again, I want to thank you for taking time out of your day. I know everyone's really busy, especially in cybersecurity. Really appreciate those of you that did attend, and hopefully you got something out of it. Take advantage of getting access to that ebook. If you didn't get a chance after to access that code. I'll just pop it up again as we're closing. Reach out to me on LinkedIn, send me an email, direct message. More than happy to give you the link for that as well. You'll probably see it come out in my feed in the next few days. If you do subscribe to my newsletter, you get a lot of these access to these things earlier than the general public release. It is free, again, the newsletter, but people are finding it very helpful to be able to get that sort of continuous tips and tricks and how to apply it on a regular basis. All right, thank you again. Really appreciate you, like I said, taking the time. This has been a great experience for me. If you've got any feedback on how the live event worked and the quality of it, that'd be great as well. Like I said at the beginning, it's the first time I've used this platform. Seems to be quite powerful. With that, I will wrap it up and hopefully catch up with you in another channel somewhere online. Thank you very much, everybody, and that's goodbye from me. Cheers.